Hello and welcome to Moderate Fantasy Violence, a podcast about pop culture and the world around it. I'm Alistair.
And I'm Nick.
And in this episode, we'll be reviewing the second series of Marvel's Luke Cage, and then asking, can you take Luke Cage out of Harlem? But before all of that, Nick, what have you been up to since we last spoke?
Well, in another area of the premium telly battleground, I have been watching the second season of The Handmaid's Tale. I think this is finishing up in the States, but I'm watching it on the UK's very own Channel 4, so I'm only on about episode 6 or so. But yeah, it's good. They've moved past the novel. I think they did not quite all, but most of the novel in season 1. And now they seem to be pushing it outwards a bit, doing a bit more wider world building, which is quite interesting. They've gone a bit beyond the specific household where Offred, the main handmaid of the title, lives. And yeah, so far I'm quite enjoying it. It actually kind of sort of a bit like Game of Thrones did when they moved past the book. It feels a bit more like an actual written for telly drama. There's a bit more focus on the plot actually driving forward every episode, which there may be some hardcore book fans out there who hate it, but I'm finding it quite watchable.
Sounds good. I watched the first episode. I really liked it. There's just so much TV out there that I didn't have a chance to watch anymore. I do plan to go back and watch the whole show at some point. I really liked the book, which I read a few years ago. Crucially, it's one of only 2 books ever that I've been reading on the tube, and someone has interrupted my reading to tell me that's a brilliant novel. That's my bar for a great book.
But 2 books have met.
Yeah. It's the tube test.
What's the other one?
Call it. The other book was Jonathan Mead's book about architecture and place called Museum Without Walls.
Nice.
It's quite a niche book.
Yeah.
I think if you see someone else reading it, it's probably worth saying hi to them because there's quite a niche interest.
True.
But I was wondering, does the TV show sustain the level of tension and drama from that first episode, which really is very powerful?
Yeah, pretty much. I felt it got a bit stretched over the course of season 1 because there were some things they were trying to do to make the book last the whole 10 episodes, which got a bit, come on, okay, we get it. But yeah, season 2, if anything, they're building on things quite nicely. A lot of stuff has happened. Obviously, since you haven't seen it, and some listeners may not have seen it, I guess I won't spoil it, which has driven a lot of extra tension into the situation between Offred and the family she lives with, which has turned things up a bit. I say there are things I don't like about it. At the moment, there's one specific thing I don't like about it, which is that I still don't particularly like the love interest character. In a cast which includes Elizabeth Moss, Ralph Fiennes, and Yvonne Strahovski, all of which are quite good with quite a strong presence. The guy playing the love interest, I don't feel like he has quite the same presence. I feel like he's a bit flat. His name's Nick, unfortunately, so another terrible TV Nick for the list. But yeah, sorry Nick, I find you somewhat the weak link in what is otherwise quite a good show.
Well, I guess only having one weak part is pretty high standard.
Well, yeah, and as you'll know, and well, anyone who's seen it will know, it's a very much the Elizabeth Moss show. You know, Elizabeth Moss can and does carry quite a lot of it. Although it's a bit less the Elizabeth Moss show in season 2, to be fair, but it's still pretty Moss heavy.
Sounds good, yeah. Well, I do really want to go back to watching it. It just gets away from you when you don't follow a TV show as it comes out.
I mean, for our UK viewers, and also for you, I guess, I think season 1 is all up on Now TV at the moment, if that's of use to anyone listening. That's me. What have you been watching, doing, thinking?
Well, I've got a recommendation of another pop culture podcast that our listeners might be interested in. So yeah, if after you finish listening to this episode, you're wanting more pop culture analysis, and who wouldn't, I can recommend a new podcast from the podcast production house Slate. This is Decoder Ring. That's like decoder as in, to solve a code, and then ring as in, phone ring or the one ring. It's hosted by their TV critic, and it's a monthly podcast, and the concept is each month they dive into a sort of a mystery or sort of unexplained thing about TV or film or just kind of pop culture in general. They're always things you never really wondered about until they start asking questions about it. It's a really fascinating show. They do a really good job of speaking to interesting people and kind of really digging into these mysteries. They've done 3 episodes so far. The first one was on the laugh box, the kind of machine that adds the laughter track to old-fashioned sitcoms. And it's more actually about why did this habit of adding fake laughter to sitcoms become a thing, and then why did it go away, and the whole history of canned laughter, which is absolutely fascinating. The second one digs into fan theories about TV shows with a especially detailed look at John Locke theories based on the BBC Sherlock, digging into people who had various theories about kind of the direction the show was going and the writer's secret agenda for the character.
Yeah.
And the third episode is on clowns, and I guess clowns in pop culture and why we're frightened of them.
Which we have already done, to be fair. We did beat them to that. We did do Are Clowns Still Scary last September, I think, when we did it.
Yeah, it was one of our first question-based episodes.
And also, actually, we did Sports Night at some point with the old recommendations feature. Isn't that quite a big part of, or at least usually cited as well, a major show in the fall of the laugh track?
Yeah, in the sort of the history of why laugh tracks were got rid of, a clear example, which they draw on heavily in the podcast, they interview, I think, one of the writers from Sports Night, the one that isn't Aaron Sorkin.
You mean the producer, Tommy Schlamme?
Yes, sorry, that's just the producer. Yes, you are right. Yeah, obviously, Sports Night started out with a laughter track, and then they had to phase it out when it just clearly didn't work with the way the show was written, because it wasn't written in this very much kind of joke, pause, laugh, next joke format.
As I'm sure we discussed at the time, Aaron Sorkin's dialogue is very ba 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 ba, and this doesn't really leave time for do a joke. Everyone pauses to look smug. Continue.
Yeah. I mean, other shows, obviously, like The Office and The American Office that followed up, obviously, shows that really don't work with laughter tracks. The most interesting part of it was that she interviews people from an unusual internet subculture who are people who go through and add laughter tracks to sitcoms that don't have laughter tracks because they just really love laughter tracks. And it is weird, they play a clip of Modern Family with the laughter track added, and it does sound a bit strange.
Yeah, I saw someone showed a clip of Big Bang Theory with the laughter track cut out, and they're just saying geeky things, then everyone laughs. And if you watch it without the laughter track, it's just someone mentions Batman, and then everyone pauses. It's like, wow, these conversations about Batman are much slower than my personal conversations about Batman. As you know, if you listen to this podcast.
Yeah, The Big Bang Theory is torturous without the laughter track, which is part of my general theory that The Big Bang Theory actually isn't funny. It's just clever TV marketing.
I mean, The Big Bang Theory, to the best of my knowledge, unless it's all a giant conspiracy, those are real people laughing. That is a studio audience.
Yeah, well, they're probably on drugs.
You can tell because it's a three-wall set, can't you?
Yeah, it's like Friends and, other shows that, clearly taped in front of a live audience. In fact, Claire Rousseau, this podcast's Harry Potter correspondent, has been to a live taping of The Big Bang Theory, I'm pretty sure. She told me at one point.
And what drugs did they give her?
We'll have to ask her to find out.
Claire, tweet in. Disclaimer, I'm pretty sure Claire is not as big a fan of The Big Bang Theory as she used to be.
No, yeah, exactly. We might want to save that for the end. I don't think anyone's as big a fan of The Big Bang Theory as they used to be.
I mean, I'm not sure. I mean, it's one of those things. The actual geek subculture seemed to turn on it quite quickly at around the same time. I assume someone's watching it, but actual geeks don't seem to watch it.
I assume it's gone to the place that kind of all sitcoms go to, like Friends, Scrubs, How I Met Your Mother, and now The Big Bang Theory, which is just kind of early afternoon, endless sort of repeats on Channel 4, watched by stoners, the unemployed, and people who just got home from school.
Probably, but they are still making it, unlike all those. So
yeah, well, because the others get killed, and then they need a new one. So
Young Sheldon, you mean? Young Sheldon specifically.
Who actually wants that? Like, who watches that, and B, who ever thought that was a good idea for a TV show? It's just, the concept is just awful, and everything about it. And I haven't actually seen it. Okay, full disclaimer. So I can't really give it a fair review, but I just honestly don't know who thought that was a good idea. And I've never met anyone who has watched that show, let alone liked it.
Well, it's been renewed for a second season, apparently, according to my live research. So someone's watching it. Not me, obviously. I dropped The Big Bang Theory itself several years ago, so I'm definitely not in the market for Young Sheldon.
Oh, it's a horrible combination of Big Bang Theory plus nostalgia.
Yeah, Big Bang Theory nostalgia and a precocious child. Sounds great.
Yeah.
Who knows how much of this will stay in the podcast? Okay, and for our main review feature thing this fortnight, we are looking at the second season of Marvel's Luke Cage, the latest of their rolling series of shows in the Defenderverse. We've covered a fair few of these now. I think it's possible this might be the only one of the Defender shows they've made that we haven't done at least one segment on at some point. So yeah, this is the second season of Luke Cage, starring Mike Coulter as the bulletproof superhero defending Harlem against the threat of crime from the barber shop where his mentor Pop used to live until he was tragically Uncle Bend back in season 1. And yep, this season the threat is, as it often seems to be in these superhero things, twofold. There's the gangster Mariah Dillard, who was introduced in the previous season, played by Alfre Woodward, along with her buddy Shades, buddy/lover/mentor/ it's a very confusing relationship. And then there's Bushmaster, played by Mustafa Shakir, who is the new big charismatic villainous presence who might actually, for once, pose a real physical threat to Luke Cage. Alistair, what did you think of the whole Luke Cage Cage thing?
Well, I'm really enjoying the second series. The main thing is that Luke Cage is a great main character. He's charismatic. He's very well acted by Mike Coulter. He's just great to watch on screen. There's kind of the right amount of moodiness and sort of moments of humour. So yeah, I'm always up for any kind of TV show with Luke Cage in it, be it like him in a starring lead or supporting role in Defenders. What I like about this show is that it's probably the least super of the Marvel superhero TV shows.
I don't know. I saw Iron Fist, and that was not super.
No, that wasn't. Well, I suppose that was. It was super powered, but it certainly wasn't super. But yeah, Iron Fist suffered from, I think, having too much hero lore in it and kind of mystical hero stuff. What makes Luke Cage great is that for most of the time, it is a sort of a crime gangster story. Yeah, the main plot is to do with like sort of a gangster turf war that's kicked off in Harlem. That Luke Cage is trying to protect the people of Harlem from these two gangs. One, as you said, led by Mariah, and one led by Bushmaster. And obviously, yeah, it's got some bits about Luke Cage's past and how he attained his powers. But I always find whenever the show gets too much into things like how did Luke Cage become superpowered and things like that, it kind of loses some of its edge. It's just better with he's a hero, he's bulletproof, he's in the middle of a crime drama. That's when the show works really well. And so far, in the second series, I haven't seen all of it, they're doing crime drama well. So I'm liking it.
Yeah, for the record, I've seen 8 episodes, which is nearly 2/3 of it. But yeah, Luke Cage is a show I always want to like slightly more than I do, in that it has an aesthetic I really like, the sort of the cool soundtrack, the sense of place, the crime drama feel. It does have a feel that's actually different to a lot of other things, especially a lot of other Marvel-y superhero shows, which does put it above a lot of the Defenders shows, which do sometimes feel a bit like they're shot on the cheap in very generic rooms and corridors. But this show does have a lot of colour, it does have a lot of sort of noise and background and a sense of, yeah, as we say, community and place. I do find the actual storytelling a bit slow sometimes, though. The actual way they move through things, something happens, people spend about the whole subsequent episode talking about it. Good points first, though. This is a much better execution than Season 1, assuming it doesn't go completely to pieces in the last 5 episodes. It does have a lot more momentum. I'm feeling both the villains. They haven't shown any sign of introducing another terrible one or getting, as Alistair said, lost in their own lore by banging on about his origin for episodes on end. And yeah, the actual characters and relationships are quite interesting. Mariah and Shades have a relationship which is a bit strange, but it is genuinely unlike a lot of other things on TV, so I am quite enjoying that. And Bushmaster has a lot of presence, even if he also, has the same name as his own porn parody character. There we go. That's this episode's joke.
Yep.
Yeah, it kind of has the opposite problem to Punisher, really, which I think is actually the least super Marvel show. But
That's a good point, yeah.
Yeah, it has the opposite problem to Punisher, and the Punisher had a very generic revenge military gunman aesthetic, but it had a very watchable driving plot. It was very enjoyable and easy to watch, and everything unfolded at quite a good speed. I didn't feel that as a long 13-episode series. Whereas Luke Cage has a much more interesting look and feel and aesthetic and characters, which are a lot less, here is the gunman, here is the gunman's mate. But I do feel like the plot sometimes runs a bit in looping circles and just suffers from general, the sort of thing I say every time we review these shows, general Netflix syndrome. Not enough plot for 13 episodes, resulting in quite a few quite long scenes which just feel like we're running on the hamster wheel while we wait for the next thing to happen.
Yeah, I think you're right there. It's got the same issue that a lot of the Netflix shows have, that you could probably quite comfortably cut 2 or 3 episodes and end up with like a tighter plot. The Punisher comparison is an apt one, because I think with Luke Cage, they're trying to do something more than just a crime drama. Whereas I think with the Punisher, they're very much, this is a military revenge drama. So we've got to amp up the action, amp up the violence. There's got to be like some kind of shooting in every episode. There's got to be something violent in every episode, especially the later ones. With Luke Cage, they feel obviously they're trying to tell a crime story about this turf war going on in Harlem. But there's a sense that this show is about more than just a crime. We've got this character who's very much rooted in this place that has such a rich history, and we've developed some very complex characters. And we want to spend time kind of digging into their psychology, their history, to make this more than just like a crime drama, make it like a drama, in inverted commas. And I think, although those are noble ambitions, as you say, sometimes they spend too much time dwelling on the intricacies of characters when it would be better if the plot moved on. Sometimes it works really well. I've really been enjoying the bits between Shades and his sidekick, who's just got out of prison. They've got some good scenes, and there's one scene in episode 6. I won't spoil it for people who haven't seen it, but there's kind of a long scene while they're waiting to ambush Luke Cage, and they have a conversation about their history, and it gives you insights into the characters, revelations about Shades and his past that you were surprising, and there's a real sense of drama between the characters, and you get a sense of who they are and how they're real people, and that's really good. And occasionally, Mariah, when she wrestles with her, she's trying to go legit in this series, and she's wrestling with her past, how she comes from this kind of crime dynasty and is trying to turn it into something good. And there are moments when they kind of do dig down to this, human drama. Same with Bushmaster. There's a good scene in episode 6 when Bushmaster argues with the man who runs the restaurant that he runs out in, basically that. And he argues about kind of the status of the Jamaican community in America and how Bushmaster's violence is giving them a bad name. And they are digging into the sort of politics and stuff, but there's a really powerful sense of the characters in these scenes. But the problem is, those scenes are really good, and that's when the show kind of achieves what it's trying to achieve. But as you say, there are too many long dialogue scenes that don't have the kind of impact of the ones I just mentioned, which is why the show is quite slow paced.
I was really enjoying it for the first few episodes, actually. I feel like it might just be having a bit of a stodgy midsection, and unfortunately you've got me for this podcast literally as I'm in the midst of, well, hopefully coming to the end of this stodgy midsection. Some interesting things are still happening, but they seem quite spread out, whereas the first 3 or 4 episodes of this season I actually thought were quite bang 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 bang. I thought things were actually going along quite well. There was some stuff with the Rosario Dawson character, Claire Temple, the reliable best thing in a lot of her scenes in these Netflix shows, which were really, really good. In fact, to be honest, I feel like one of the slight problems they have with Cage himself is I'm not sure he's had much interesting to do since that storyline with Rosario Dawson finished.
Yeah.
I feel like he was wrestling in quite an interesting way with his own anger issues and his own role in the community. So now he's just sort of a reliable dude, while everyone else is getting on with their storylines.
Yeah, and I think also because you've seen 8 episodes and I've only seen 6, so maybe I'm just got the kind of stodgy section to go, because just before we started recording I was watching episode 6, which I think that's the one that the turf war really kicks off, and there's Luke Cage has got to protect, one character. I don't want to say too much in case people really haven't seen a lot of the show, but he's kind of fighting off gangsters and Bushmaster, and there's also a lot of character drama that works really well with Shades and Mariah. So the fact that I've just come off episode 6 that was very strong influences my view of the show more, and I guess maybe 7, 8, which you've seen, is where there's that mid-season bloat, which is a problem that a lot of the Netflix shows have. They seem to, around a kind of 7, 8, 9 episode mark, it kind of slows down a bit, which is the point when you think, they should really ditch these 13 episode series and maybe go for 10 if they haven't got the plot.
I mean, I think they're quite good usually. Certainly, this series of Luke Cage, to give it its credit, has been quite good at drip-feeding you a certain amount of development. Like, I can't with good conscience say nothing happens in episode 7 and 8. I could name, I think, off the top of my head, at least 2 or 3 major things that happen in each one. They are, reasonably reliably keeping the stuff coming. I do still feel like there are some slightly long 15-20 minute stretches between the stuff where everyone just sort of stands around looking at the walls. But it is... it is ticking through. I think it is probably slightly better paced than some of the other Netflix shows, which have just felt like nothing happens for episodes at a time. Ironically, the show is rumoured to be giving us the 10-episode Order of Our Dreams is the second season of Iron Fist. So,
all right. Well, we'll see if that improves things.
Yeah.
I mean,
I'll probably watch it.
It can't be as bad as the first series, but then probably famous last words.
You've seen episode 6. You've gotten to the Kaleem Wing cameo, haven't you?
That's earlier. That's like episode 4 or 5 or something like that. I mean, they are good at doing the cameos, which does make Luke Cage feel very much a part of, the whole Marvel TV universe. Like, Kaleem Wing turns up, I think, in episode 3 or something like that. Foggy Nelson, destined to be just a lawyer for other superheroes, turns up in episode 5.
I like that, though, because that's incredibly Marvel Comics. That is what happens in comics. It's whenever a superhero needs a lawyer, it's always either Foggy Nelson or Daredevil. And I guess they can't afford to just have Daredevil randomly turn up and do some lawyering, so it's probably always going to be Foggy.
Yeah, and I guess he's not with Daredevil anymore. He's kind of pursuing his own law career with Jerry Hogarth, yeah.
But yeah, I thought kudos to them actually making Kaleem Wing seem slightly cooler, to be honest, in this show than she did in her own. I mean, obviously, we take our cheap shots at Iron Fist. It's not hard. But yeah, she did seem a lot more assured and in the part here than she did in most of Iron Fist, which is, I guess, why a lot of people are like, could we just cancel Iron Fist and fold the characters into Luke Cage, or have Kaleem Wing and Misty Knight get their own show?
Yeah.
In the comics, they are a team called Daughters of the Dragon, so there is a slow grassroots campaign for cancel Iron Fist and start a Daughters of the Dragon show.
Yeah. Well, maybe that's what they'll get if Iron Fist Season 2 is bad.
Yeah, no, let's not underestimate the Marvel desire to just expand and expand. We will quite clearly get both Iron Fist Season 3 and Daughters of the Dragon.
Yeah. Although I really like the sort of subplot of Misty Knight and Clean Wing, and I'm generally enjoying the Misty Knight subplot of this series. I guess this dropping spoilers for previous Marvel TV shows. I'll try not to spoil anything from Luke Cage Series 2, but if you're chronically averse to spoilers for Luke Cage Series 1 or Defenders, maybe now's the time to drop or skip to the next section. But obviously Misty Knight lost her arm, and she's obviously trying to deal with that. And I think, yeah, they do a really good job, again, of doing some of the detailed characterization stuff. She's lost her confidence. She's both metaphysically and literally off balance now. And she's trying to, rebuild her life. And also, there's been revelations about her partner being a dodgy cop. There's a lot of interesting psychological stuff with Misty Knight going on, and I think they're handling it very well.
To be honest, I always feel like Misty Knight has a more interesting sort of journey and through line through this season than Luke Cage sometimes. She is one of the highlights. Although there was an odd beat in one of the episodes where she gets her fake sort of cybernetic bionic arm.
Yeah.
Spoilers for anyone who doesn't know, but that's Misty Knight's main thing in the comics, that it was inevitable. And there's one scene where she's struggling to pick up a coffee cup, and the bloke setting her arm up for her is just it'll take time, you'll adjust. And then in every other scene, it's just her perfectly natural arm, and she just, fiddles with it, chucks objects around, punches people. That adjustment period was not long.
Yeah, I guess they felt they needed to do that to make it seem vaguely believable.
The believability of... There is the adjustment period for new technology. It is 4 to 5 minutes.
Yeah, this is very much TV logic.
Yeah, very much. But yeah, it's one of these things. I feel like the plotting is slightly loose, but on the other hand, I like all the characters for the most part. I think they are doing interesting things with them, and I am mostly happy to spend time with them, which is why, despite what might sound like a fair amount of grousing, I am mostly enjoying this. I think it's a tighter, more enjoyable series than Series 1, certainly.
I'm really enjoying Bushmaster, the new villain, especially as Luke Cage Series 1 had Cornell, or Cottonmouth, played by Marsha Ali, who was an amazing villain. And that was very much one of those sort of stars align moments. It was like when they got Carey Mulligan to be in Doctor Who, just before she became probably too famous to be in Doctor Who after being Oscar nominated and becoming a major Hollywood actress. Again, they got Marsha Ali to be in Luke Cage just before he won an Oscar and has now become a big name actor. And obviously he was great in the first series, and then the replacement villain for the second half, Diamondback, wasn't such a good villain. So Luke Cage has, in other words, set the standard for villains A quite high and B quite low. Bushmaster is a really good villain, and crucially what they fixed, which was the two problems with Diamondback that they fixed with Bushmaster, is one, they should just have one villain throughout all of Series 1, not do one, then do another. Which, again, I haven't seen the whole thing, but they seem to be sticking with Bushmaster as the main villain for the whole thing. And two, they've dealt with what I call it the Superman problem, which is basically if you've got a super strong hero, you need a super strong villain for him to fight, or else you end up with something silly like at the end of Luke Cage Series 1, when the only way they can have a decent showdown between the hero and the villain is that Diamondback had to find a sort of cheap knockoff Iron Man suit somewhere, put that on, and then they could have a superpower battle.
The Diamondback snake costume, that was...
Yeah.
That was not what I wanted after 12 episodes of,
gangster drama.
Socially relevant gangster drama. Luke Cage and the bloke in a stupid-looking snake costume just punching each other in the street for what I think was a solid half hour. That really was the icing on the cake of my slight annoyance with that storyline.
Yeah, it didn't end well at all, did it? Yeah, it was quite nice that they folded in the Hammer Arms Company from Iron Man 2, I think was the creator of it, which was a nice bit of continuity, but it certainly didn't save what was pretty poor ending to Series 1.
Yeah, even as the resident continuity nerd on this podcast, I can confirm that no amount of tiny nods made that any better.
Yeah, but it's one of my reasons why I always say that Superman 2 is better than Superman 1, the Christopher Reeve Superman, because in Superman 2 there's General Zod and Superman can have a proper fight with him. And in this, again, Bushmaster and Luke Cage can have a sort of a proper superpowered fight.
I feel like you're implicitly dissing the classic Superman-Lex Luthor rivalry a fair bit here.
I know, I don't think it works as well because, I mean, when it works, it works. I suppose the fact that, the idea that Lex Luthor has to outsmart Superman because you can't outmuscle him. But doesn't it usually boil down to he just threatens Lois Lane?
Very much. I mean, yeah, that has always been the issue with that, I guess. If it always gets to the awkward part of, at the end there has to be a fight, Lex Luthor will have to either put on a suit of cybernetic armour or dig out some kind of pawn like Doomsday to do the fighting for him, which is always a bit awkward. But anyway, I'm not here to review Superman. I mean, we'll get onto this in a minute, I suspect. But, the fact that you actually get a sense of the area and the community is one of the big sells here. It's one reason why it does manage to sell some sort of battle for the soul of the city stuff, which would sound like bullshit on other shows, and which we have literally been making fun of since the very first episode of this podcast. But, it does kind of work on Luke Cage because it does actually sell the soul of the community to some degree.
No, exactly. And they've got a really sort of broad range of characters. It's got a large cast, and they're all kind of representing different views of the community. There's even like interesting bits when they have they'll follow like a character who's just kind of like, there's one bit when there's a kid who's walking home, and they kind of have just a bit with him calling his parents, and you kind of just get a sense of like there is like a wider world around Luke Cage, and there's the people he runs the barbershop with. They built like a sort of a large cast, and the fact they filmed it like on location in Harlem as well, and the opening credits is like obviously made of shots of sort of various like Harlem landmarks sort of superimposed over Luke Cage's body. And obviously there's more to it, which I'm going to save my material for the second half, but there is a very strong sense of place, which is one of the things I really love about this show. I think Harlem's a really interesting place, and they do a good job of bringing the community to life.
Yeah, but yes, as I say, we'll get to that in a minute. It's good. It's definitely better than Jessica Jones Season 2, which you may remember I wailed on a bit a few episodes ago. I feel like they've definitely managed a better second season than that.
Yeah, that's one of my main notes in that, this is good. Despite maybe a few slow-paced episodes, Jessica Jones, I think, just completely got stuck in the mud, and it's like wheels spinning for a while. Whereas this is kind of, it's got a good plot that is like progressing, and I do really like the characters. One of the things I didn't like about Jessica Jones Season 2 is they kind of messed with the characters too much. I don't know what they did to the Trish character, but she wasn't the Trish character from Season 1.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there was a good intentioned plot about addiction in there somewhere, but it just got a bit, I am no longer enjoying this. It's slow and everyone's miserable. And not in a fun, enjoyable drama way, just in a slightly depressing, trapped in the mud way. And I feel like I've got nothing to really hold on to or care about.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah.
But Luke Cage is better than that. So, yeah, if you were wondering if they could keep it together for second series, then they can for Luke Cage.
Yes, they can. If anything, as I say, I think they've genuinely improved on it. So, good job, team. I will actually watch those last 5 episodes.
Pause for jazz music. That's pretty good.
Thanks, I'll just leave that in. Okay, and a related point this fortnight, as hinted at during the previous segments, the Luke Cage show has a very strong sense of location and community around the Harlem neighbourhood where it's based. So, can you take Luke Cage out of Harlem? Would the show work in a different area? Is it that integral to the character? Is the area in some ways a character in the show, but in its own right? Alistair, what do you think?
Well, to answer the question as briefly as possible, no, I don't think you can take Luke Cage out of Harlem.
Yeah, my first 2 notes are, no, end of podcast.
Yeah, partly because whenever Luke Cage leaves Harlem, it doesn't go very well. There's a scene when he goes to Brooklyn and he's off his turf, and things don't go very well for him. Also, the first series completely lost its momentum when it did a plot line when Luke Cage left Harlem and went in search of his past. But to sort of answer the question I was more asking rather than can Luke Cage physically leave Harlem, is Luke Cage's identity is just completely wrapped up in Harlem. I mean, it's the jazz soundtrack, the literary references. Someone put together, and it's really worth looking at on the internet, a reading list by compiling all the books that Luke Cage has either seen reading or mentions at various different points. And obviously it's figures, from the Harlem Renaissance, this sort of explosion in African-American culture that occurred in Harlem in the 1920s that created its identity. And the Harlem that they're showing in the TV show is very much like the Harlem of reality, in that it shows Harlem as this kind of vibrant place that produces its own music, it produces its own fashion, it produces its own businesses, and now it's producing its own superheroes. So yeah, Luke Cage and Harlem are very much intertwined.
Yeah, I saw he was reading a copy of Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates in one scene, so he's bringing it all the way up to the present day. But yeah, I mean, I don't know to what extent this is real modern day Harlem, or if this is, a slightly sort of romantic vision of Harlem during its heyday. But either way, yeah, it is definitely evoking a very specific sense of place, which, as I said in the earlier segment, thus foolishly spoiling what may be my best material for this segment, it does mean that they can put off the sort of, fighting for the soul of the city or fighting for the soul of the neighbourhood stuff, and it does actually seem vaguely convincing, which just on a wanky critical perspective does make the show actually work, instead of, when the hero goes, I'm here to fight you for the soul of the area, and then you just go, it's just a generic city backdrop, mate. I've barely even seen a resident of the area during this entire season. Not that I'm taking a shot at anyone specific, but I am taking a shot at Daredevil.
Well, lots of Batman shows also fall into this, which is we don't really believe in kind of Gotham as a place because we don't really know much about Gotham's history. I mean, it's sort of generic, large, sprawling American city. But Harlem does have a history. We know that there is a soul of Harlem to fight over. And obviously, Harlem is vibrant. It's also a place, it's poor, there are gangs. There is danger, and obviously it's a place that needs kind of members of the community to kind of look out for it and protect what's good and against what's bad. I mean, it's not too different from Tottenham in London, in that an area that has poverty.
In many ways, Alistair said, I'm a lot like Luke Cage.
I'm not protecting anyone from anything. If anything, I'm Foggy Nelson in Luke Cage, just kind of there on the side, being like, yeah, I can be here too. I have skills, legal skills.
I can type. Yeah. Anyway, carry on.
Yeah. It's an area that has poverty and crime issues, but also produces great culture and has great sort of restaurants and diverse communities living together. I think in the first series of Luke Cage, because obviously the series is very much centered around Mariah's club, Harlem Paradise. And in the first, there's very much a sense that kind of there's a cultural flourishing has kind of happened around this club. And I think even in the first series, Mariah says something like, this is a second Harlem Renaissance, or things like that. So in the Harlem, in the TV show, there is a sort of a flowering of culture that is happening partly because of this very sort of influential and popular club that Mariah runs. And one of the things that makes the show very good is that they interweave footage of the club. Because so much happens with the club, they have, I think, actual popular sort of jazz artists of the day kind of either rehearsing for performances in the club or performing to the backdrop of major scenes, which allows them to weave the actual culture and of Harlem and its history into the narrative of the show, which is done really, really well. And it's not done in a kind of really ham-fisted way like, well, let's just stop now just to watch, a sort of a famous person come and have a cameo and play some music. There'll be a sort of a siege of intrigue. Like, for example, when Bushmaster first comes to Harlem's Paradise and confronts Mariah about they've got beef from the past, it is done during when someone's performing and the music matches the mood of this confrontation. They can kind of cut back and forth. It'd be better if I knew more about jazz and contemporary music in Harlem because I could probably recognise more of the artists. But I think it's very well executed how they bleed the music into the show. And in, I think, the last series, they actually released the soundtrack on vinyl because it became such a thing like, wow, this show is a great soundtrack.
Yeah, as I said first at the very beginning of the podcast, it feeds into the whole look and feel of the show, which, even if I occasionally think, could this be a little less stodgily plotted, I think the general look and feel of the show, which is a lot of what it's trying to do, is definitely there, and a lot of it is this sense of Harlem. I do think it is possible to, create a similar community vibe with a fictional place, and obviously it being Harlem does mean they can lean into a lot of real culture and make it, I don't know, is easier the word? It's certainly more tangible. Whether I could feel the same community sense about Gotham or Westeros, I don't really know.
It's difficult. You certainly are standing on the shoulders of giants when you use an actual place, especially like Harlem that has such a distinct identity. You can locate Luke Cage within it, and it works very well, partly because they've done a really good job of really thinking about how are we going to kind of bring the culture of the area into the show. And we'll have a lot of it take place sort of around a nightclub. And also around like a barber shop, which is another sort of community gathering point. So Luke Cage can, and he's always, especially in the earlier episodes before the plot gets in gear, when you see Luke Cage in his regular life before he has to go sort of vigilante, he's discussing books and he's discussing culture with the other people who frequent the barber shop. In some way, Luke Cage is holding like a salon, and it kind of works with the kind of the area and what we know about its history. I mean, you could create that artificially for a place like Gotham. It's just you're working very, very hard unless you take shortcuts by using things we already know. I mean, a lot of people say that is Gotham supposed to be a bit like Chicago?
I think Gotham's clearly the sort of gothic end of New York, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, I know a lot of Dark Knight was filmed in Chicago, but I think Gotham itself is clearly meant to be a certain flavour of New York. I mean, basically Gotham and Metropolis are basically different ends of New York, aren't they?
Yeah, I suppose there is that. I think a lot of it's shot in Chicago because for ages New York was quite restricted about what they would let people film there. So Chicago doubled for New York a lot. So did Toronto.
Toronto doubles for everything, doesn't it?
Yeah, because the Canadian government heavily incentivizes American companies to film in Canada. But one thing, for example, does Gotham have neighborhoods? because, people don't talk about the soul of New York because New York is enormous. And as Luke Cage shows, there's huge cultural differences between, Harlem and Brooklyn, even amongst the African-American and Afro-Caribbean communities of both Harlem and Brooklyn. There's clear differences. I mean, I don't know what the difference between the poor neighborhoods and the rich neighborhoods of Gotham are, other than the fact that they say, there's, they usually say, there's downtown or the posh bit, but they don't have identities within the city because the city barely has enough identity itself to be believable as a place, let alone be made up of other places with their own identities.
I mean, I'm pretty sure in the comics and certainly the better, more interesting comics that are actually trying to do things, I think they have gotten into things like the actual social dynamics of Gotham, but obviously in the films they tend to be more focused on Batman twatting whatever this film's villain is.
Yeah.
Whereas Luke Cage does, have hours and hours of television to place Luke Cage within this culture. And this culture that actually exists. I mean, Gotham does have a slight head start in that, it's had at this point an almost unmeasurable amount of culture created around it. It's very possible there may be more culture, more units of pop culture created about Gotham City than there are about actual Harlem, to be honest. Considering the 7 or 8 Batman comics that are published every month alone.
Yeah, I mean, Gotham has existed in popular consciousness for the better part of a century at this point. And I'm sure at some point someone has tried to create a sort of psychographic, map of Gotham and what it's sort of like as a place. I mean, there are obviously lots of works of fiction that do create a really strong sense of place. Like the one that jumps straight to mind is the Discworld novels and the city of Ankh-Morpork. But there's a lot of them. They do spend a long time really building up what Ankh-Morpork is like and the kind of the different areas and the different communities that live there and things like that. But I think unless you're going to dedicate 40-odd books to a place, I think a lot of other works of fiction try to stick to smaller scale. Like Harry Potter is very good at giving you a real sense of what Hogwarts feels like, and even the places like Diagon Alley and things like that. But you get a strong sense of Hogwarts. There isn't enough to give you a sense of what a city would be like.
I mean, it feels like the entire sci-fi noir genre exists on a sense of location, which can be described roughly as, well, it's a bit like Blade Runner.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, which, to an extent, gets you your locations, do your thing, but also ends up feeling a bit derivative and doesn't exactly create a strong sense of place.
No, exactly.
And a lot of sci-fi shows one can watch, the sense of place is often sort of the ship they live on, like your TARDIS or your Star Trek spaceship or whatever. And a lot of the actual places they go, to be honest, are a bit undeveloped and, we built this planet on one idea. Whereas the place that actually gets to have a sense of community or a sense of this is where this is from, this is what this is the TARDIS or whatever.
Yeah, certainly, because there isn't time, especially if you're doing a kind of, like Star Trek does, Planet of the Week. You can't have time to, dig into the whole sense of what this planet is like. Whereas, but you do get an expanding sense of what this spaceship is like to live on. That's why I think a lot of, science fiction shows and fantasy shows develop the theme of family, usually a lot more than the sense of place. You get a sense of what it's like to live on Serenity because you get a sense of what it's like to belong to the family of Serenity through the characters. Creating a sense of place requires a much larger cast and probably much more time, which is why it's easier to lean on things that already exist. I guess it also kind of depends on the story you want to tell. Luke Cage obviously is a story about African-American identity in modern America. I mean, there's very relevant discussions, as I mentioned in the top half of the podcast, when Bushmaster argues with his friend who runs the bar, and they're talking about basically, America will turn on us if they see us violent. I mean, they're discussing contemporary politics in the best way without it being sort of ham-fisted or something that's going to date really badly. So I think there is a sense of, as well as Luke Cage, they want to create a strong sense of place, so they're using a place that actually exists. Luke Cage wants to tell a story about contemporary America and sort of contemporary African-American life. I'm not enough of an expert, and obviously I am incredibly white, so I don't really feel I can talk too much about this. But I do feel that they're trying to say something about blackness in America right now, which is why they're bringing in the history, the literature, the music, the political debates, focusing on this place that's always been a kind of a centre of culture and politics for the African-American community. And the story they're trying to tell Luke Cage really works with that and would only really work, I think, in Harlem. I don't know where else they would set it.
No, exactly. I mean, obviously, to be able to say, okay, we are talking about issues that affect contemporary black people and this real place, as I say, it gets you your relevancy quite quickly.
I think they tried to do a similar thing in Daredevil with Hell's Kitchen.
Oh, well, gentrification.
Yeah, which is another genuine area of New York.
That was a valiant effort, but as I think already sideswiped a bit earlier, I don't think they really created enough of a sense of place around Hell's Kitchen for that comment on gentrification to feel particularly meaningful. I don't get the feeling we really got entirely the idea that Daredevil was really of this neighbourhood. He spends most of his time twatting around on the rooftops dealing with ninjas.
I guess because they lean much more on the superhero story. Because again, as I said in the top half, Luke Cage is the least super of the superhero stories. It's a crime story, and it's a crime story rooted in a community, whereas Daredevil is very much a story about superheroes, especially in the second series when they dig into the hand and the sort of mystical side of it much more. Yeah, in the first series with Kingpin being someone from this community but also trying to make money through regenerating it, and gentrification is a big issue affecting New York and a lot of the world's Western global cities. Again, obviously very relevant to a London audience. And they could have explored that more, the sense of what Hell's Kitchen's like as a place. So there's the bar that they drink in, which is very much a kind of iconic New York bar for the Irish community there. But yeah, there is just less of that in Daredevil, because ultimately the story that Daredevil is telling is a story about a man in a mask who fights ninjas. There's nothing wrong with telling that story, it's just a different story.
Yeah, but I think they wanted, I don't know, I get the feeling they wanted the stuff about Hell's Kitchen gentrification to have a bit more weight than it did, but because, I don't know, it always just kind of felt like the Kingpin was a bit of a generic crime person doing crime stuff. And, they did a decent job of characterising him and explaining why and how he was evil. But it didn't really feel like it ever got that into the gentrification and why there were two sides of it. I mean, I guess that's not what they're trying to do, or that's not what they were interested in doing. But as a result, I felt like that show didn't carry it off or feel as relevant and interesting as Luke Cage often does. Yeah,
no, you're exactly right. It'd be interesting to see what they do with the third series of Daredevil, which I think comes out later this year.
I mean, it looks suspicious that they're going to do something Born Again or something riffing on Born Again and dig a lot harder into his rivalry with the Kingpin, which is a story that makes sense for them to do at this stage based on the episodes they've made. But I doubt it's going to lead to that much in-depth community stuff unless they change things up a lot.
No, I think you're right about that. But I think it ultimately goes to the core of the story they want to tell in Luke Cage, which is this isn't a story about superhero lore, this is a story about crime in this community. And that's what I think the show works really well, and the sense of place works really well for.
Well, yeah, that's why it stands out among a lot of the Marvel shows, even the ones I quite like at times, like Punisher or the better bits of Daredevil, in that it is actually saying something a bit more meaningful than just what happens when this person punches or shoots that other person.
And even the sense of place kind of bled into Defenders, because especially in the early bits when the characters were kind of separate, whenever they cut to Luke Cage, the sort of yellow filter that they used for the Luke Cage opening credits was kind of crept in, and the footage kind of became a bit grainier, and they did more handheld and more shooting on location, because basically we've got to get that kind of Luke Cagey-ness into Defenders.
It was good of them to try. I don't get the feeling they're going to make any more Defenders anytime soon, so I guess maybe they've decided that experiment isn't worth repeating, but it was interesting watching them try.
Well, I'm glad the second series is continuing very much in the vein of the first series, with this, still keeping a root in this community and still exploring these issues, which is probably my favourite thing about the show.
Yeah, to be honest, I've been a bit on a lot of the Netflix stuff recently, with the possible exception of Punisher. It's been a while since one of these really did a lot for me, so yeah, this is probably my favourite they've done for a while.
That's all we have time for. If you've enjoyed this episode of Moderate Fantasy Violence, then please subscribe in your podcatcher of choice so that you never miss an episode. While you're there, please leave us a review, as it helps other people find out about the show. You can also visit our website, moderatefantasyviolence.com, where you can listen to back episodes of the show, bonus audio clips, and short written pieces by Nick and myself.
And if you want even more material from us, we also post on Facebook and Twitter. In both cases, I think if you search Moderate Fantasy Violence and look for the little circular purple logo, you should be able to find us quite quickly. And yeah, if you want to follow me on the internet, I am at NickMB on Twitter, or nickbryan.com on Instagram, or at the website, nickbryan.com. You can see details about my Hobson and Shaw crime books, or read some free comics I've posted there.
I've been Alistair Ball. You can follow me on Twitter at Alistair J.R. Ball, and you can find more of my writing at redtrainblog.com. Join us next time when we'll be reviewing the second series of Legion.
At last.
Find out what we think in 2 weeks' time. Thanks very much. Goodbye.
Bye. So yeah, this is the second season of Luke Cage, starring Mike Coulter as the bulletproof man and defending Camden against crime. Camden? No.
I'm pretty sure he's defending Harlem, but he can defend Camden if he wants, but probably from emos.
Luke Cage beats up emos. I'd watch it, to be fair.